Okay, so I've been watching a film by David Attenborough, and it's basically about the state of the world, what has happened, and what is going to happen. And it was pretty overwhelming because he starts out, you'll see the film. I mean, I'll you'll find it. And of course, he is now in his 90s, and he's been doing what he does, traveling around the world. He was always a privileged young man. And so he traveled right from the very beginning. So he shows films of himself hacking through jungles with accompanists, hugging gorillas, sailing, and doing all these things. So this particular film really starts with the state of the sea, the coral, the various things that he's been watching for decades and is feeling extremely, extremely worried about at the moment, which we all are. And, he shows the coral how it used to be. He explains how and why it dies. Then he shows devastating amounts of dead coral. He goes on about fishing, which, he's been doing before, but he does it even more thoroughly. And he has a chart that comes up every now and then that shows the population when in the 1920s, the amount of trees there were, the cattle, whatever. And then every now and then it changes decades and things so that we can see. He leads you through the deterioration of the situation. And it gets to be pretty terrifying. For instance, there's more chickens on the planet than any other living thing. He knows exactly how many of any particular insect there are. And of course he goes on about when, orangutans weren't even found. They were found relatively recently, when I said relatively, in decades, but orangutans weren't actually kind of known for absolutely ever. And of course they're down to terrifying numbers, and in one point he has a picture of, I don't even know if it's a tree, it's a long pole with an orangutan just trying to climb up. Yeah, it's a tree, a skinny tree with an orangutan going to the top to kind of lie on the littlest branch at the top to look down on everything. So it's really an amazing film, and every now and then you see him come in to talk about how devastating things are. And I've been thinking a lot about, I haven't even finished seeing the film, but he then goes into what the scientists are saying is going to happen almost decade by decade. We know about the winds, we know about the fires, we know about the floods, we know about the devastating deterioration of food sources, of course, particularly right now with this war going on. So we know about, and I mean, we're going on about Ukraine right now, but of course what's going on in Africa and Ethiopia and places in terms of starvation is, is torture. Just to know. And so he always, right from the very beginning, he sort of says things like, I'm going to tell you all about this, but things can be done. And you see him at a conference, showing his film to people and to show them how devastating things are. And he talks about the future and how it can be changed. Well, as far as I'm concerned, how I see it, when I think about population and the usage of everything, I think about the great big concrete, what do you call them, apartment buildings is a better word for it, where people live, in Dubai, where they've claimed the sea and they've got these monumental buildings full of people. Then, London, when I first hit London in 1958, there was Big Ben, there was the Carlton Towers. There were some tall buildings, but they weren't tall by present standards. And now architects have gone mad. So when I see television shows, detective shows or anything about contemporary London, I basically have to turn them off because, I've been in London in the last, I think about 12 years ago was the last time I was there. And of course Chelsea's still there, and there's, Soho's still there. But there are these areas, especially by the water, where ships can come in and pick things up and dump things off. And, a place is just built out of glass and concrete. And then you think of Singapore, and you think of Hong Kong, and you think of all these places where, you know, when he was young, and even when I was young, you know, buildings were buildings. They weren't edifices of the ego of architects. And of course, when you think of some of the places where the the places that people live, I mean, I really don't have the language. Places in I don't know, probably Hong Kong and places where there's banks of poverty housing. I mean, we had poverty housing in England. I forget what it was called. You know, the tall brick buildings, and then these people live in these things like sort of insects. And you know, now because consciousness has dropped the way it has, I'm sure that there's a lot of nastiness on the stairs in many of them. And you know, I mean, I know you know more than I do about this. I mean, there's slum dwellings that are just absolutely appalling. So what we've got is such a population growth, and such a debilitating level of consciousness about what's really, I mean, all these places, they have all these flats that have 2 or 3 lavatories in them, you know, and then they have a television in every room. I mean, there's the consumerism of humankind on the middle level of finances. And then, of course, the massive, mindless yachts and those huge ships are pushing into Venice and places, all these great ships where people, what do they call them, you know, tourist, anyway, you know what I mean, judge. I mean, I just see it all, and I know that there's no way that we're going to be able to make it through. As far as I'm concerned, the human race is clearly doomed. And I don't really want to talk like this, but I don't see it any other way. I know that everybody of my age goes, well, thank God I'm old. I mean, some of them believe that they'll come back as Buddhists and they'll be born again, in which case, wow, you know. I used to say if I came back onto this planet and there was nothing here except one flower, I would stand over that flower and guard it and grow it. But, you know, that was me being me, you know. I mean, right now, as I see it, I know that there's an increase in suicide among the young, and I know that there can be hope among the young, and I say mostly to the young that I know, sort of rather like the film On the Beach, I say, go down, go down, go down, go to Australia, go down, go below it, because I used to think the air would be cleaner down there, but of course it's not going to be, because you've got the massive fires. I mean, at first I used to think about, you know, nuclear disasters and how to be living above or below the hemisphere where all that happens, because there is some truth to that. I mean, when Chernobyl blew in England, if you had a little hillock, the birds on the Chernobyl side, their eggs just went soft. It could be just a little heap, like 3 feet high. If the birds were on the other side, the eggs were all right, because there's always the wind that blows over bumps. I know. I'm sure you think I'm totally nuts, but I used to say to the people, you know, just go down or go up. You know, be prepared to live in the cold. But what do I really know? All I ever do is think and burble, and fret. But I do really think that the time on Earth of the human race is severely numbered. I know that there will be people that will be living underground, that there's been a lot of preparation made, and I suppose there's a possibility that if there's a massive die-off of humanity, and there are some that have managed to live through it, then the same way the world has done this before, you know, we've had massive die-offs of animals. I mean, there was a time when 75% of living things on the planet were gone, and the planet flowered again. And I dearly believe that human beings are very, very precious, and that there are some who can learn, and that it's possible that a new level of humanity will be spawned. What they will inherit in terms of, well, I mean, you've seen Chernobyl. The buildings are still there. The school books are still lying around. But you've got horses there, you've got wolves there, you've got birds there. So I guess the last thing I really want to say is, if you cut your finger, it hurts, it might bleed a little, but within 3 days, it's almost a memory. And with plants, plants can go down to a level, well, I mean, think about fires. Everything burns, and then in the spring, up come fresh greenery. There are creatures that live like the cicadas that are under the ground for 7 years, and up they come. So I won't be here. I can only pray that, well, I think there has to be a massive die-off, something. But I hope that the planet can nurture a wiser species of human beings.